Okay, good afternoon. Welcome. Today is Wednesday, May 20th. Welcome to the Public Works Gain Reduction Committee meeting. I'm Chairman Joe Buscaino. I'm joined by Councilmember Karen Price of the 9th. And we're going to have a 98-minute public comment here. Michael, if you can fix that, please. Thank you. Sorry, guys. Let's see here. One. All these items are number 2. Okay, thank you. Okay, if I can direct your attention to the agenda, we have cards on all 4 items, right? So we'll just go down the line here and take item number 1.
Item number 1 is a communication from the mayor relative to the reappointment of Mr. Matt Sabo to the Board of Public Works for the term ending June 30th, 2020.
Okay, we have cards on this item. Bring up Herman.
Good afternoon. I'm a little disappointed that Mr. Zabel couldn't sit in on his reappointment. As we are all aware that on a timely manner he...
Good morning and welcome, Mr. Hold this time. Mr. Zabel, welcome to the room. Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
I didn't see him back there.
There you go. That's okay.
Kevin.
Go ahead. Continue.
Well, I find it in discretion of the public's interest that Mr. Zabel be more accountable to his time when attending these public meetings, that he shows up on time, because I and other individuals with a disability disapprove that you use up a lot of our time by wasting it. Show up at the meeting on time and allow us...
Okay, this item is on the reappointment. Speak to the item.
Well, this is a reappointment, meaning that it's a celebration. Although I'm on the negative issue of the celebration for reappointment, I'm just saying that Will McClure from Sacramento regarding Hazard Park ADA compliance, I hope Mr. Zabel sits in and takes action on respects to all persons with a disability in regards to Hazard Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Wayne, item number 1.
Yes, and I think the announcement at the meeting here that Mr. Sabo has changed his name to Matt Sabo, so I'm glad I know that. But Mr. Sabo, on his board, since being on with Kevin James, has painted more red lines on streets blocking parking than I've seen in the city's history. I mean, everywhere you go, Public Works is going out and expanding the red lines, taking thousands of parking spaces away from the people.
Speak to the item, please. Speak to the reappointment.
It's about his duties as commissioner and what he's allowed to go on. How can it not be about the item? God, you people. Don't reappoint this guy. Get somebody else because he's served there. He's late to a lot of these meetings. I went to one meeting where Mr. Sabo commissioned this meeting in your district and almost irradiated a family with a cell phone tower over their friggin' roof. Thank you.
Okay. We have 2 additional cards. I think, I don't know. I don't see these individuals in the audience. So, okay, with that, we will bring, first of all, point of privilege, we'll welcome the Commission President of Board of Public Works, Mr. James, to speak on this item. Hold the applause, please. You're disrupting the meeting. If I have to ask you again, you will be removed. That clear? Don't disrupt my meeting. Mr. James, welcome.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I don't anticipate that there would be any issue with this reappointment today, but I did want to make the appearance because I wanted the commission to know, and in fact I frankly would like Commissioner Sabo to know, that when it comes to someone on our board that has an unmatched command of the issues that we deal with, it's Commissioner Sabo. He is someone who has I have developed complete confidence in his judgment, in the discretion that he uses, in the decisions that he makes. And I would also mention that it's very clear that he has earned the confidence of the mayor, not just because of the initial appointment and the letter from the mayor on the reappointment, but as I pointed out yesterday, Mr. Chair, in the full council, Commissioner Szabo, in addition and in line with his work as the President Pro Tem of the Board of Public Works, also serves as our labor liaison for the many, sometimes and often quite complicated, but very important labor-related issues that we deal with through Public Works. So not just myself as the President of the Board, but the entire Board relies significantly on Commissioner Szabo's expertise, and he's a stellar board member. And I do want to say something just briefly about this reference to our meetings. Mr. Szabo's, Commissioner Szabo's attendance is excellent. And one of the things that I don't do is report each morning when someone's in a meeting that may require them to be 10 minutes late, 5 minutes late, leave 10 minutes early for some other city business. I just don't do it to keep the meetings moving freely. But we all, with our schedules, are able to make our meetings. But there are times when we have 5 of us, and there are times when other city business calls us to do our business with 4, rarely, if ever, with 3. And so I did want to speak to, because the opportunity arose when I saw it on your agenda, to speak to Commissioner Szabo's great performance as a commissioner on the Board of Public Works. So I'm here to wholeheartedly endorse his reappointment.
Thank you, Commissioner James. Tell us how you truly feel about Matt Szabo. If we can ask Commissioner Szabo to come forward. Thank you, sir. Thanks for joining us. Commissioner, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, as you heard from your colleague, and I wholeheartedly agree, you have such a wealth of knowledge in how this place runs, and as it relates to public works and your commitment and compassion to serve this city at this level. An impressive and extensive resume that extends from your days here at City Hall to, working in Sacramento and working in labor relations. Amazing work. Tell us why you want to continue to serve, not here at City Hall, but most importantly, why do you want to serve at this capacity as Commissioner of Public Works?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's been a tremendous honor to serve as a commissioner over the past year and a half, particularly because in my previous experience with the city, it's been at more the 30,000-foot level, working in the mayor's office or in the council offices, but to have the opportunity as a commissioner to work in what I believe is one of the very best departments in the city, with some of the most outstanding professional employees that you'll find anywhere, working on the projects that the residents of the city care so deeply about. I strongly believe that outside of public safety, the work that is done by the Department of Public Works is what our residents care most about and expect the most from its city and its city servants. It's been it's been an honor and in many cases a challenge. As Commissioner James said, in my role in working with our labor partners, as you know, all of our contracts were open this year, and it's especially our friends in SEIU represent much of the Department of Sanitation, and it was critical that we move forward and have fair contracts that respects the workers, and that ensures that our employees are at work every day, and puts the city in a position where we can do what we need to do, which is to grow, which is to hire back, which is to have a succession plan in place for all the retirements, so that we're actually able to continue to do the work and expand upon the work that our residents demand and deserve.
Mm-hmm. What do you foresee some of the special or some of the concerns or challenges that's facing the Bureau today?
I think almost all of the challenges come back to the one issue, and that's staffing. The professionals who are there, given the resources, are amazing, and they can accomplish almost anything. But we are still recovering from that 5-year period where we lost thousands of employees through early retirement. We hired no one, and so now we have this gap in our bureaus and auction of departments citywide, where we need to hire. We need to hire more people than we have the capacity to hire, but we're still within some budget constraints. I think that ultimately is the principal challenge, especially in areas where we are the bureaus that rely on the general fund, like Bureau of Street Services.
Right. Such an aging workforce as well. We have to get
Absolutely.
ready for that. In light of National Public Works Week, we had a great presentation in council yesterday, and Mr. Price joined us. The failing infrastructure that cities are facing across the country. Here, happy to move forward with the sidewalk issue, but our streets still, a third of our streets are in failed condition, and trying to find funding sources to fix nearly 9,000 lane miles. We're continuing with our Save Our Streets LA initiative. Where do you see that taking shape as we move forward in the coming years?
Well, I think there are a number of options that we can pursue to obtain the necessary funding. I mean, that's what it comes down to. You know this as well as anyone. It comes down to money. As it relates to sidewalks, we had a lawsuit, and as a result of the settlement of the lawsuit, we're dedicating a significant amount of money over 30 years to fix the sidewalks. That's a good thing. We should have been doing that anyway, and we need to take the same approach with our streets. Now we're talking about a magnitude of dollars much greater than that would be required to fix all the sidewalks, to fix all of our streets, and so without going into various discussions that are happening around the building right now in terms of strategy, I think there are a number of creative ways that we can go get the needed dollars.
As long as we get it done while we're here.
It's critical.
Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Szabo, for your commitment and for your visibility. You're at events and you're accessible and available, and I think that's the kind of commissioner we want to see. The kind of commission we want to see. Because you're right, the Public Works, addresses those quality of life issues that everybody is concerned about and that we get calls on. You've been on, though, for about a year and a half. Tell us what you think some of the successes have been over this period of time since you or the board that's
Well,
accomplished.
no, thank you. There's a number of successes. I've had the privilege of being the liaison commissioner with for the Bureau of Engineering, and in particular, when I was first nominated by the mayor, that was my request, because the Bureau of Engineering basically touches everything. They do the design for all of our public infrastructure. So I think, without question, being a part of the process for developing and retrofitting some of our great bridges, the 6th Street Viaduct, personally one of the great projects that's going to be happening in the city. We just approved and sent to the council the Hyperion Glendale Bridge. We've, in Mr. Zedillo's district, are in the process of, we did take out the Riverside Bridge and have replaced it with, or are replacing it with a great new public space. Not just a bridge, but it provides modes of transportation for pedestrians and for cyclists, and it provides public space where people can enjoy the views of our river, which we're going to be investing in. So there's so much that's happening, in that part of the city that we're a part of, and I think also, it is happening right now, but our Sidewalk Repair program. We have a committee that meets every 2 weeks.
Working group, yep.
And we have begun the process. I mean, the problem that we've had up until this point for the past several years is even if we had so little staff that even if we had the dollars, it was difficult to do the work that we need to do in the magnitude we need to do it. So under the leadership of Gary Lee Moore and all the other professionals in the bureaus, contract administration, Bureau of Street Services, they are building a sidewalk repair machine that we will need to have up and running for the next 30 years, and I think that's going to pay dividends in all of our neighborhoods, and it's exciting.
Thank you.
So I'm going to have a motion to approve.
I'll move.
Okay,
If we approve the renomination.
fantastic. We'll without objection, we'll approve item 1 for Mr. Szabo's reappointment to the Public Works Commission, and we'll see you in council. When are we going to do this in council, Michael?
We're looking to Tuesday.
Tuesday, fantastic. Thank you, congratulations.
Thank you
Look
very
forward to
much.
working with you
All right.
again.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. Okay. Let's take item number 3. If you can read that into the record, please. We have a few cards.
Item number 3 is a resolution from council members.
I'm sorry, Mike Davis, Commissioner Mike Davis. Sorry I didn't introduce you. Missed you. Thanks for joining us, sir. Appreciate you. Thank you. Okay, item number 3.
Item number 3 is a resolution from council members Koretz and Bonin relative to the naming of the intersection of Westwood Boulevard and LaGrange Avenue as Raymond Fouquet Square.
Okay, I have a card from Jonathan Weiss. Please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you. I am a member of the community. I'm also a member of the City of LA Bicycle Advisory Committee. Ramon started a bicycle ride, a bicycle club that's thriving on the west side. A lot of people have gotten together over the years socially, and the club also does things involving charity, youth programs. And there's a ride that starts from the same location where near his former restaurant. That's still going on nearly 50 years later. About 80 to 100 people ride every Sunday morning. And I'm also a real history enthusiast, and I think it's important to mark places in our city that are significant to give us a sense of place. So I've also brought a petition that was signed by over 200 people with some comments supporting this. We've had it approved by the local neighborhood council, and I know that the council member obviously supports it. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for joining us. Jay Slater. Welcome.
Thank you. I am the recent past president of Velo Club LaGrange, the largest cycling club on the west side of Los Angeles, possibly the largest in the city. Raymond Fouquet was the founder of the club, but more importantly, he was a community member, lived in the 5th District, what is now the 5th District, and was a restaurateur of the 5th District on Westwood Boulevard. He began a restaurant called LaGrange. It was a French restaurant, and once he was up and successful, he was responsible for helping out all of the other restaurateurs who decided that Westwood Boulevard was a viable place to start a restaurant. So he wasn't just involved in cycling. He was a beloved community member. He lived just 2 blocks from his restaurant. He was a wonderful man, and when he passed away 2 years ago, we had a memorial ride for him, at which about 400 people showed up at the corner of LaGrange and Westwood. Most of them took off and rode and did the ride, what we call the Nichols Ride, that was named after him. A wonderful man, highly deserving of the recognition for what he brought to the community in West LA.
Thank you, Mr. Slater. Thanks for joining us. This will be a great tribute for he and his family. Herman, please let me remind you to stick to the item.
Oh my God, I almost fell in here. Well, it's a great suggestion, naming an intersection on behalf of someone who is deserving of this accreditation. But keep in mind there are other persons in this society of ours who are godfathers who have to be recognized for their contributions to mobility, access, to ride bikes, walking streets, safe sidewalking streets. So Joe, keep in mind, the godfather of the American Disability Act who created it was Justin Jr. Dart. And I myself, Mr. Herman, who advocates on behalf of anyone and everyone who deserves a naming, a placard, a certificate, a reward, an offer of gratitude for your service in the city of Los Angeles, anywhere in the state of California. So I recommend this on behalf of LaGrange Avenue, Ramon Forquet Square. Yeah, I'm for it. Good job, Herman. Thank you.
Hey, Wayne?
Yes, it's good to see that we're naming streets and intersections after such important people. Opening up a restaurant, that's never been done before in the city, that's a first. Riding a bike, I can't think of anybody that's done that before. He invented what exactly, or what exactly? So what we have here in CD5 is what you typically have. It's somebody that's got enough influence to get an intersection or a street named after them, like Persian Square. That's the last one they did over there, I recall. So when tourists come here to Los Angeles and they go to Westwood Boulevard and LaGrange, of course, they're going to travel to L.A. to see the Raymond Forquet Square because they would travel all the way from China to see that square. So I fully support it, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Without objection, we'll approve item 3 and send that to council. Thank you. Okay. Let's go to item number 4.
Item number 4 is a motion from Councilmember Buscaino and Blumenfield relative to the proposed expansion plans, new zones, and increased funding for the Gang Reduction Youth Development Program.
Okay, I have 3 speaker cards. Can you call Mr. Cedillo? If I can welcome Mark Fawcett. Did I butcher your last name? Sorry. They do that to me all the time. If you can just pronounce your last name for me. Mark.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Fawcett. I'm Vice President of Amity Foundation.
Okay.
We work with the reentry population in Councilman Price's district. We support item number 4, and it is important for the city to be mindful of the current population of men and women that are staying on communities. Excuse me 1 second.
Okay. Hold this time, please. Thank you.
That are staying in our communities at record numbers. Folks leaving prison are coming out on parole, but also probation, as we know, with AB 109. And those are record numbers in terms of people getting off of supervision. It's important for the city to have these resources available and to connect those formerly incarcerated to services and jobs when they're back in our community. It's also important to be creative and look for funding at the Board of State and Community Corrections and other sources of funding that could support these efforts at the city level.
Thank you. And thanks for your service.
Thank you.
You are saving lives. Thank you. Okay, I have a card from Wayne.
Yes, it's good that Councilman Cedillo joined the
Stick to
meeting.
the item, please, on the gang reduction zones. Stick to the item.
Okay, being very hostile, so I'll try to talk in a calmer voice like Mickey Mouse. Well, relative to the proposed expansion plans, new zones and increased funding for the gang reduction youth development program so kids don't get into gangs. Yay! Because the last thing we want to do in CD9, which the city clerk forgot to put down in the item agenda that it's representative of CD9, and that's because CD9 is a poor neighborhood area. It's not like CD5 where all the rich are, it's CD9. So there's a lot of gangs in there, and they're tagging the whole place. Everywhere you go, tagging and killings and murders.
So we need to get the kids reduced out of gangs, not eliminate gangs, but just to reduce it a little bit. So I support it on Mickey Mouse. Thank you.
Okay, final speaker on this item is Herman.
Well, you residents that are here in the background, I do support you. I know the difficulty of what it's like to come out of a rehab or have some certain circumstance of life change the perspective of what you felt was equal access to a federal and local government services. We know that there is not enough stability in this world to provide you a good job, so to keep you from going back into the same society that our society has created, which is no jobs, no jobs, no jobs. So don't worry. You may not make it into the law enforcement, but I believe you can work and become a part of our society. Having a great job at the City of Los Angeles will open up sustainable living quarters for you to get you off the street and in a nice, warm home and provide you the necessities to prepare yourself for the real world, which is employment. And I thank you, Gilbert Cedillo, for taking action on all these points. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if I can bring up Ann Tremblay. Ann's here. This is exciting news. It's a great commitment from the mayor of expanding the grid zones, and means we're adding also some extra dollars to get a greater reach on the work that we're doing as it relates to our gain reduction efforts. So give us an overview of these expanded grid zones if you can, Ann, and welcome to the committee.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councilmember Price, Councilmember Cedillo. I'm happy to be here to talk to you about the expansion of our grid program with the additional funding that's in the budget that's pending before the City Council. With the additional $5.5 million, all of that funding will be going back out into the community and to our community-based organizations who contract with us for gang prevention, intervention, and reentry services throughout the city. As you are aware, and we've talked about before, we have our pending procurement process for the new 3-year cycle of contracts that is pending. That procurement process is currently in place, and when that process was started a few months ago, we included the proposed expanded areas in the hopes that we would be able to have additional funding to service those areas. We spent a lot of time talking on the ground with our partners, having lots of conversations with LAPD, analyzing a lot of statistics and information from LAPD, a tremendous amount of crime data, gang crime, violent crime data, both Part 1 and 2 gang crime, so even the lower level gang crime, as well as domestic violence, to look at where we should expand and where we were missing the critical services of gang prevention and intervention, particularly on the intervention side, frankly. We were seeing significant areas of the city where, despite the great work of our gang intervention workers who are contracted, we weren't able to access or have influence over those gangs, so we were not able to always appropriately respond under our model with our intervention workers to try to do rumor control, keep the peace, and prevent retaliation. And in those neighborhoods where we didn't have access to particular gangs, we saw some repeated retaliation and some increase in violence. So the plan is to go from what now is in effect 17 zones to 23 zones, and expanding the territory throughout the city, but the primary areas where we would be adding based on LAPD divisions, which is sort of how we've set it up, are in Southeast, Newton, the Rampart, Olympic, which are adjacent to each other in the mid-city, as well as Hollenbeck. Those are the largest areas, and 77th Division. Mm-hmm. Those are the areas with the most significant additions. Some of the other some of the other current zones will also have LAPD reporting districts, so neighborhoods and blocks added to them as well, but those 5 areas are where we saw the most significant need and where we had the greatest gaps. So our goal is to provide the full level of intervention services in all 23 zones and ensure that we have some level of prevention services. As you may recall, currently, some of our smaller areas of coverage only had either prevention or intervention services. So we are looking to make sure that that model that we have, that's based on a lot of research and data, including from the previous ad hoc committee on gangs, that we're covering all the prongs of the community-based gang intervention model. And so we want to have some level of prevention and intervention services in every one of these areas, with the focus in these new 5 areas being on added intervention services, so we can increase the number of intervention workers working in the community. We can increase the number of gangs that are covered by those intervention workers, as well as increase the number of clients served. With these additional funds, we want to make sure that we can continue the juvenile gang reentry program, which is currently grant funded, so that we can continue that in the 3 areas at a minimum.
From the federal government?
That's currently from the federal government.
Anything from the state?
Nothing from the state on the juvenile reentry. So that's federal funds. We want to make sure, because that's gotten off to a very strong start. As you know, we have, for the first time, have a formal relationship with juvenile probation, the county probation department, and 2 great partners in SEA, and particularly Homeboy, who is not one of our traditional grid contractors on these services, has been doing a fantastic job. Probation's pleased. As you know, it took us a while to get up and running on that because we're crossing over city-county,
Right.
But it's off to a great start, so we want to be able to support that in those 3 neighborhoods, Northeast LA, 77th, and the Watts area, even if the grant funding, even when the grant funding is complete, and then look ahead to how we can expand that model to the other grid zones once we know what's working and what's not, and how we can make sure that we can enhance it. The other pieces of what we're looking for as part of the expansion are, one of the things that you're aware of from the year-end crime statistics is that there has been an increase in aggravated assaults, particularly domestic violence, throughout the city. In looking at our mapping of the grid zones and the proposed expansion, we saw a strong correlation between where we were seeing increase in gang violence, in overall violence, as well as domestic violence. It's happening in some of the same areas, those increases. So we also have intervention workers who have been coming to us and talking to us about the fact that they're seeing family violence within their work. Our agencies work with youth and families and are seeing family violence. So we want to make sure that we're using the opportunity that GRID has in reaching youth and families, and our intervention workers engaging in families as a result of violent incidents, that they are well equipped to identify issues of family violence and to know what resources are in their community and how to access them. So we're looking to partner with an area domestic violence agency so they can help enhance that. We've already started doing training within our current training with our agencies to ensure that they're as well equipped as possible to have an effect on this. I think what it goes to is gang violence, and the reduction of gang violence is the primary objective of the GRID office and our partnership with our community-based organizations and LAPD. But I think we've seen that our intervention workers and our community-based organizations have the strengths and the abilities to be influencers in the community on violence generally, and we need to capitalize on that, leverage that. I think our intervention workers in particularly, since they're intervening in very volatile and difficult situations, is that we have the opportunity to enhance their skills and their ability to be influencers in the community with regard to violence. Beyond gang violence. We've seen that they've been leaders, and so we want to make sure they have all the tools that at their disposal to ensure that they can have an influence on all the violence within the community. As you know, we see violence in many of these neighborhoods sort of in multiple layers. It can be that individual base, it can be the family base, and then that spreads out and affects the community. The community also suffers and experiences that violence, both the gang violence and the domestic violence in many instances. So we want to make sure we enhance that. We also, as we've talked about before, want to make sure that we have the ability to cover incidents that happen on a quick-moving basis where we may not have contracted intervention workers. Looking at sort of a rapid response team when things flare up, particularly where we have our city and county crossover issues, and trying to enhance that. And I think, as we've talked about before, take a more regional approach. The gangs and the gang territory don't necessarily care about our city-county lines.
Right. So where are we at on that? I know we wanted to fold in Chief McDonald, the new chief. I know you've been having meetings with
We
their
have been
staff.
having meetings. We have another one this Friday, and I think after this Friday's meeting, there'll be more to report to you on that. But looking at this rapid response team as a way of including some of our county intervention worker partners, and looking to that idea that we've talked about before of having qualified intervention workers, a list of them, even if they're not through city contractors, who we can utilize when issues happen outside the grid zones, like recently has happened over in Pacific Division, where we've had some gang violence that was well outside
in Culver City area,
our grid zone, as well as when we have different events, the MLK parade. Sometimes we have the gang issues that pop up around the Hollywood nightclubs, of trying to make sure that we can use our intervention workers and their skills to good effect, as well as deal with that city-county crossover. So I think down in South LA is where I think we'll start, because of the close proximity of some of the county side gangs, as well as the sheriff's leadership down there, to see if we can influence, particularly like in the Vermont corridor area. So
The Watts Willowbrook area as well.
Exactly. So we're looking to see how we can influence that, and again, build partnerships, build relationships beyond, sort of push our grid model beyond what it's been, to have a greater impact. That's really what we're talking about. We see that there was a lot of need in these areas, particularly areas they happen to coincide with all of your council districts, the areas with great need. I know you all know that. We've had these conversations, and so the data bore out that in particular your council districts, or 3 council districts as well as others, were the areas that needed some significant expansion. And so we'll have, depending on how the procurement process works out, we expect to have new agencies. We've had several new agencies apply through the procurement process for some of the new and expanded zones. I do, by the way, have some maps for you.
Can you touch on the year-round services and the Summer Night Light program? What parts of the city are going to be touched by that?
Okay. Well, if I may, right now what we're looking out for Summer Night Lights, or taking sort of some of that spirit of Summer Night Lights and the success of Summer Night Lights, what the plan right now is only in the fall on Friday nights at some key parks, and that's going to depend on...
Been identified already?
They have not been identified. We're going to look at the first 6 months of the year crime statistics, and also look at what's going on in terms of participation at the SNL sites over the summer, look to find where the highest need is and where we can have the most impact on those Friday nights. And that's going to depend significantly on our private fundraising. As you know, it's a public-private partnership for SNL. We've included the Friday night programming in our asks through the foundations and corporate sponsors in order to have the funds to help support that. We'll also be, one of the factors that will go into play in choosing those sites will be rec and parks locations and current services. Some of them have, for example, the Friday Night Teen Extreme that already exists, where they have staff there, and that has the hope is that we can leverage what's already being spent by the city and capitalize on that, rather than since the funds will be limited and funding will be a challenge. And then we'll be collecting data and seeing whether on those Friday nights we're able to have an impact.
Got it. One last question, then I'll turn over to my colleagues. As it relates to your mapping and the work that you've done with data sharing and gathering, Has your team folded in the gang injunctions, and if they're layered with the grid zones?
Yes.
They have.
We did look at that as well. Yes, we went back and sort of updated the needs assessments that were done when the grid office was started and the original zones were created. We now had 2010 census data to add to that. We looked at the gang injunctions as well as an extensive amount of stats from LAPD. LAPD was wonderful. They gave us a lot of raw data so that we were able to run it and map it. And if I may, I just want to give you a couple quick bits of information so you can see the value add. Under the current zones that we have right now, we cover 215 of LAPD's reporting districts. The new zones will
250 of how many?
215 out of 1,135 LAPD reporting districts. With the new zones, we'll cover 377 LAPD reporting districts. The real key is where you'll see in the crime categories. If we look at the crime data we used, 4 years of gang crime, 2 years of violent crime, domestic violence. Currently, our zones, if we looked at that data, cover 45% of Part 1 and Part 2 gang-related crime. With the new zones, that goes to 73%. If you look at that same data. 45% of all gang-related violent crime, it goes up to 74%. Domestic violence, it's currently 34%, it would go up to 56%. Gang-related homicides, currently 43%. The new zones would be 80%. Of coverage. Gang-related aggravated assaults, currently 47%, goes up to 79%. So you can see
Data-driven.
a data-driven approach, but I will also say I'm happy to report that what LAPD requested, even just line officers, gang officers, what our partners and stakeholders saw and talked about anecdotally, what our grid database showed, what our grid team suggested based on their on-the-ground experience, matched the data. So the anecdotal matched the data. So we feel confident that we'll be going into the right additional areas to provide that added support and resources.
Thanks, and thanks for your follow-up on the regional strategy as well.
Yes, and I'll keep you
so
posted
important
on
to
that.
me, and because I've seen how you can chase the gang crime, and gang crime has no line. So I really appreciate the follow-up on that. Looking forward to having a thorough discussion in this committee with both Chief Beck and Sheriff McDonald. Mr. Price.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. Grid certainly has been one of the
Yes, of course.
bright spots in the efforts to curb gang and related violence. You mentioned the great, this is the map. You mentioned the funds primarily are coming from federal sources for this expansion piece, federal and private?
No, the expansion piece that we're talking about in terms of additional zones will be from the city's general fund, the $5.5 million increase that the mayor proposed and is now in the budget as it went forward from Budget and Finance. The private funding only goes to the Summer Nightlights program, and the federal funding is specific right now. The federal grant funding we have that we were discussing goes to our juvenile reentry project, which is currently in Northeast LA, 77th, and the Watts area. That was a grant that came before you previously. So we're still expending those grant funds. But this expansion is from the general fund.
And you say it's not clear yet where those 5 new sites are going to be?
No, we have released the RFP based on all this data and examination. If you look at the overall city map in front of you, I think on the top there, you'll see the areas. Right now, the current zones are in red. If you look at the blue, that's the added zones that went out in the request for proposals, the procurement process that's underway right now. And so you add the blue plus the red, and that would be the new coverage area. So the blue is the new area. So if you take a look at that, you can see it's a significant addition, particularly in South LA, the Mid-City, Rampart, and Olympic areas, as well as some on the east side and some in the harbor area, as well as some significant areas in the valley.
Yeah, well,
All, again, based on the data.
again, I think part of the success has been really plugging in with local organizations
Yes.
and individuals.
Yes.
The shot callers and others who are really the influence.
Yes, and we'll be coming before you in June once the procurement process is complete, because we'll be before you looking at the approval of the new contracts for the next year of services. So we'll...
Those by June, is that?
Well, the plan is the procurement process is underway. It will be completed in the next couple of weeks. The contracts team will be working with the agencies that are successful in that procurement, and then we'll be presenting the contracting for each of the zones, as well as some of our other grant funding to you, as we do on an annual basis, in June. So I'm hoping it does happen in June, so we can be up and running with the contracts in July. So that's our goal.
I know that this has been a great model, but are we planning to do anything different, or just expanding it and providing more intense services?
We are constantly looking at it and reviewing it to see how we can make it better, looking at our data, our grid data.
But you are adding domestic violence piece.
We are adding the domestic violence piece based on both anecdotal information and data, as well as many of the incidents that our intervention workers respond. But we also now finally have our grid database in a position where we can draw data on a regular basis to see what's happening with the youth and family served. Remember, we talk a lot about the intervention worker piece. We talk about summer nightlights a lot. But the other big fundamental piece, and where the money goes to, is the community-based organizations that are serving the individuals and the families. So last year, over 1,100 youth and their families were provided gang intervention services. Over 2,000 youth and their families were provided prevention services. This year, I think we're right now currently 1,500 youth and their family are receiving prevention services, and over 600 youth and family are currently this year receiving intervention services. They're always adding and then graduating clients. So we look at what dosage. That's the term that gets used in academia and social work is dosage. What dosage are you giving these clients, and seeing what the results are? Are we seeing on the prevention side a decrease in risk factors for these youth at the end of services? So if we aren't, or we're not seeing as much as a decrease we saw at one time, what are we doing? What's the dosage? Should we be doing more of one thing and less of another? Our data is already telling us that definitely with our youth, we're seeing a high percentage who are using illegal substances. And so do we have enough services and support, or do our agencies have that to make sure that they're able to provide those services to the youth? On the intervention side, we want to see that those youth and young adults are moving away from gang activity and increasing their pro-social activities. Are they enrolled back in school? Are they getting job training? What are their goals? Are they having better relationships with their family or other positive adult role model so that they can move on from the gang?
Thanks, Ann. You good? Mr. Cedillo?
So tell us about the dosage of reentry services.
The dosage in reentry services, well, right now for our gang reentry services that are specifically called reentry is our juvenile reentry that we have in those 3 zones where we have SEA and Homeboy as our contractors. And so they're providing services where they connect with the youth and the family 90 days before release from juvenile hall or a juvenile camp, to prepare for the youth's return, and then prepare the family for the youth's return so that they can make sure they're immediately enrolled in school and they can get readjusted and reintegrated with the community. Then they also work with a case manager, as well as in Homeboy they call it a navigator. With SEA, it's an intervention worker to help support that youth in what they need over the next 6 months, and if necessary, 6 more months in terms of services, in terms of behavior change, whatever support they need, the wraparound services to make them successful. So that's for the juvenile reentry that's specific to that grant. Many of our prevention and intervention clients that our agencies serve are young people or young adults who may have spent time in custody, juvenile custody or adult custody, and are coming out. And so again, our agencies are providing those services to those clients and their families, and with those that are coming out of custody, providing the services that are relevant to them, depending on what that is because of their recent release from custody. So we do have, it's not reentry in that formal way, but it's part of the services. Many of the youth we serve are coming out of custody in adult or juvenile custody. And we keep statistics on that. I don't have them for you but in front of me, but I can certainly tell you about what those numbers are.
And do we have any plans for increased funding in this area?
Yes, I am happy to say I have a grant writer who joined the team a couple of months ago, and so we're looking at what grant funding we can bring to the city, both for gang reentry, but reentry in a more broad base. I know Mark Fawcett from Amity was here earlier, have had conversations with him as well as others to see where we can partner initially with grant funds, but then if we can figure out what our long-range plan is as a city, not just for gang reentry, but for reentry more broadly, how we can make sure we get those funds, whether it's from the state coming out of the Prop 47, AB 109 funds, or from federal grant funding. There's a lot of federal grants out there right now that we're looking at to see if we can get those funds brought to the city, whether they're ones that the mayor's office can apply for, or making sure our partners know if it's ones that community-based organizations have to be the applicant, and that we can support them in those applications to help get those funds brought to the city.
Sure. Talking about using other funds, on the Saturday Night Lights you talked about that's funded by private sector?
Summer Night Lights, yes.
Right, Summer Night Lights. And then on the, but aren't we integrating some of those workers into the city workforce?
Yes, that's exactly. With Summer Night Lights this year, I neglected to mention that, so thank you for bringing it up. We, this year, are not using a fiscal agent, a nonprofit fiscal agent. This year, we've moved to having Rec and Parks be the fiscal administrative agent. Summer Night Lights is still a Mayor's Grid Office program, but we already worked closely with Rec and Parks. Now we're working that much more closely in partnership with them to have the youth squad, the site coordinators, the other seasonal staff come on directly through Rec and Parks. So those are the public funds that go to Summer Night Lights. Are those funds that pay those employees. The private funds go to the intervention workers as well as all the supplies, the food, and other pieces of it. But the public funds do go through Rec and Parks. So we're excited about this because I think we're in a position to now institutionalize a lot of what Summer Night Lights is about, to also hopefully create some great new city workers by having them on as seasonal employees.
And as seasonals, do they get fully integrated? They get benefits, civil service, all the...
On the seasonal, not for seasonal employees, but as you may recall from previous discussions, our Summer Night Lights jobs do pay more than the other summer higher LA jobs. It's a significant amount. So we are paying the city's living wage.
How much is it?
The hourly rate, I can look that up for you, but it's based on, we had to make sure that we complied with the living wage ordinance, which I think last year, even through the private, through LACC, it was $12 or $13 an hour, so it's in that ballpark. I can get that number for you. But they certainly are being integrated into what it's like to work for the city, and I think with luck, we're creating potential city employees over the long haul. And as you know, one of the things I want to mention, because I know we include your offices and your teams and the other ones, is that we do, with the youth squad, make sure we're hiring youth from the neighborhoods around the park. That's key to us.
I approached a couple of some of the employees at Nickerson Gardens and Jordan Downs who I've come across. They're really thankful for that opportunity. Good.
Good.
Thank you so much, Ann, for that comprehensive report. No action on this item. It's a note and file. And looking forward to budget tomorrow, and moving forward, allow you and your team to do your work.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for your support, and I know that the mayor appreciates it as
Yes,
well.
thank the mayor for his commitment to expanding these.
I will
zones.
do that.
Please,
Thank
you
you.
so much, Ann. Okay, with that, I think our final item is item 2, right?
Yes, but prior to that, would you like to reconsider items number 1 and 2, now that
Yes.
all the council members are
Please.
present?
That'll be the order. Without objection, we'll approve those items
Yeah,
unanimously.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. There's a bomb scare,
Yes. Yeah.
and I was out of the building, so it took me
Get back in.
about half an hour to go 1 block
Good.
to make a left. So, my apologies, sir.
No worries. Thank you. Okay, if you can read into the record item number 2, please.
Item number 2 is a report from the city attorney and ordinance relative to prohibiting the storage of personal property in public areas.
Okay, we'll take speaker cards first, and then we'll move forward with the presentation. If I can invite forward, if you hear your name, please come forward. Eddie, Howard, Darian, James, and Adam. No last name. Please come forward. Just take a seat. The first 3 I called. And if you can, please kindly identify yourself, and you'll have a minute to speak. We'll start with you, sir.
My name is Adam Rice, and I am a member of the Los Angeles Community Action Network. I have been organizing for civil and human rights since I was 16 years old. A little older than I look, hopefully. I'm 20, that's 22 years doing this work. And I've never seen anything like the city of Los Angeles or this ordinance. I was on the streets of Skid Row myself. I'm a college graduate. I worked for the airlines for 16 years, was laid off, fell on hard times and ended up on the streets, have been a victim of previous discriminatory policies like 4118D here on Skid Row, and had I not moved off the streets into a small apartment in South Central, I would be in line to be victimized by this ordinance, which of course did not have a human impact statement because humans are not mentioned in it. You know, I mean, we worked for years to protect these civil rights, and we urged the city not to push this ridiculous ordinance through. This discriminatory ordinance is simply a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Sure.
Yeah, my name is Darian James, and I'm a member of the Los Angeles Community Action Network. We oppose this ordinance and are offended that our city continues to criminalize this poverty. I'm new at this, right? I fell on hard times, right? And I'm looking at this, right? Let me just read a little bit more, then I want to address this real quickly. LA Can has worked for years to protect the civil rights of homeless residents until everyone in need of a home has one. We are strongly opposed to the proposed changes to LAMC 5611 because they violate people's basic right to own property. I just wanted to address that. I read this letter dated May the 6th, a report from the attorney to the city council, right, saying that there's going to be some provisions listed in the ordinance. Right now I'm reading the ordinance 2 weeks later, May the 20th. Some of these provisions aren't even in this aren't even in here, right? It's listed on the agenda item with no comments, with capitals, highlights, identifying that everyone knows the severity of this, right? In 2 weeks, this has been put down to the public, and no one's even had a chance to really look at this.
Thank
right?
you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Eddie Howard. I'm the founder of Skid Row Think Tank and also Advocacy Collective. Also the founder and president of Just Love Outreach. I'm also a member of the Los Angeles Community Action Network. And we unequivocally oppose this ordinance and are offended that our city continues to be criminalized. Let me just talk quickly about the criminalization of the homeless, in this case, in their property as well. The mayor wrote out an initiative to help the homeless. And in that initiative, some funds were doled out. There's $100 million that were doled out, and $87 million of that went to the police department that they used to criminalize individuals on Skid Row. That's what we're basically based at. And we broke that down to about $300,000 a day. And what we're saying is that money could be better used to provide housing to those individuals, because we truly believe that housing is the solution and not storage. Also, we just want to say that this ordinance will go a long ways to continue to criminalize. So if you guys will vote for this ordinance, then you will be complicit with the criminalization of the homeless on Skid Row. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next three speakers, please come forward. Wesley Walker, Jen Dogon, and Steve D. Welcome. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. My name is Wesley Walker. I'm a member of the Los Angeles Community Action Network. We oppose this ordinance and the offense that the city can continue to criminalize poverty. I was on the street years ago, and I know what it is. I was arrested for 4118D, and I still managed to get off the street. But those that are still on the street, I feel for them because, we've been working for many years to protect the civil rights of the homeless residents. Until everyone in need of a home has one, we strongly oppose to the proposed change to the Municipal Code 56.11 because it violates the basic rights of people, property. There are many problems with this ordinance. It makes it impossible for homeless residents to have any property with them regularly. Also, how will it be enforced? Will the business owners be required to move their signage and property on the inside? Will the tables that are on the street now in these upscale restaurants be required to be moved in?
Thank you. Thank you. You finish your thought? You can finish your thought. Want to finish your last sentence?
Yes. No matter the impact, vote no on this ordinance unless it revived to be far more narrow scope and that it can be ensured that homeless residents aren't the only one targeted by this ordinance.
Thank you, sir. Sir.
Evening. My name is General Dogon, and I'm born and raised on Skid Row. For the past 10 years, I've worked as a civil rights organizer with L.A. Kent, and one of my job duties is point man on our community watch team that monitors interactions between LAPD, the business improvement districts downtown, and Skid Row residents. I have been on hundreds of property confiscation incidents, a lot of dumping incidents, and just property incidents as in general. In fact, I was one of the organizers that talked to Tony Levan that brought the lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. And I am here today, and I strongly oppose the proposed changes to LAMC 5611 because they violate people's basic right to own property. On its face, the ordinance deprives people of their right to be secure in their person and possession. This includes property. Also, people can't comply with the ordinance by moving their property to another location. This means homeless residents simply can't own personal property that they can't carry on their body 24 hours a day. They will get a 24-hour notice and then be subject to a citation or arrest and have their property impounded. It's not human or physically impossible. What's the purpose of writing an ordinance that's humanly impossible to comply with? The purpose of this ordinance is to remove people and their belongings out of downtown as gentrification is coming. This is legislative enforced displacement, and it's a human rights violation. And I'll be watching out there with my community watch team, and I can guarantee you the city again will be in federal court. And the courts, let's keep it real, the courts have been consistent with upholding property rights of the homeless folks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Steve, is it?
Yes.
Welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Steve Diaz, and I am with LA CAN as well. As you already heard, we're in direct opposition to the proposed amendments to 5611. The amendments to 5611, if passed, would make it illegal for a person to possess personal property in a targeted area. The proposal states that even if a person moves their property, it still can be taken as long as it's kept within that targeted area. I asked committee members, for example, what would you do if you were told to move your car? You couldn't park your car in a specific area because it needed to continue to be moved and not allowed back in that area. And if it was kept in that area, it could be taken. Just a consideration to think about. It's also extremely important to note that no additional resources are given, but yet property from across the city will be taken to one storage facility inside of Skid Row. Lastly, it's really important to ensure that enough public comment and vetting has happened of this policy before it moves forward. For example, we could have had 2 minutes instead of 1 in this committee. It could also have gone to other committees to continue the conversation moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Pete W. Welcome.
Pete White, Los Angeles Community Action Network. So this committee passed the previous version of the amended ordinance with strong reservation. The core of those reservations focused on not enough storage capacity to implement a purported citywide ordinance and concern about the balance of rights afforded houseless persons across the city. The amended ordinance that is before you today flat out ignored those concerns, yours ignored you, and continues down the treacherous path of dehumanization and criminalization of targeted individuals, property, and communities. Black Lives Matter. This amended ordinance is little more than a lawsuit waiting for a plaintiff. It follows Justin, Jones, Levan, and the writing on the walls suggests more money being spent to defend criminalization instead of housing the houseless. It embodies the conclusion drawn from the recent CAO report, which highlights $100 million being poured down the rabbit hole in absence of a coordinated strategy to end homelessness. Do the math. This is part of a system that spends $300,000 per day to violate civil and human rights, instead of using that money to build housing. We urge you to flat out oppose this ordinance. Housing is the best storage. Black Lives Matter.
Thank you, sir. Our final two speakers, Herman and Wade, please come forward.
Well, it is most definitely an unrude, undue hardship. I take this in consideration as harassment, harassment, harassment. The keeping of one's belongings, the removal and the disposal of property from a sidewalk anywhere in the city of Los Angeles is the most offensive thing this city will do towards a person who intentionally discriminate, who act with malice and reckless indifference towards individuals who do not have a home or storage to place their personal property. When this goes into the Ninth Circuit courts, they're going to laugh at you because you continue to harass, and harass individuals who are homeless, individuals who are mentally incapable of having a residence and living in a place to shelter all their fucking belongings. That's a joke. 5611.
Yes. Now we get to the bottom of it, don't we? The homeless don't have a use. They're useless. And what you do with uselessness is you throw it away. And you're throwing away their lives, starting with the only thing they have, their possessions. That's how you break a man down when you take away what he doesn't have anymore. He has nothing. And that's what you've done. You've criminalized the fact that there's people that cannot afford to live in this overtaxed, underjobbed, underserved, corrupt, really run city. So you have the courts. They told you to stop doing it. You're going to go right back and do the same goddamn thing you've done before, and then you're going to go back to court, and you're going to get stopped again, but you're never going to stop persecuting people that are disabled and homeless because you guys want the property and the money.
Okay, thank you. As it relates to this item's colleagues, as we all know, homelessness is a growing problem. The recent homeless count showed a 12% increase in both the city and county from just 2 years ago. But what was most shocking was the number of tents, makeshift encampments, and vehicles occupied by homeless people soared 85%. And in my district, I've funded a dedicated loss and emergency response team coupled with an LAPD Quality of Life car to address these problems. This draft ordinance from the city attorney we are considering today attempts to strike a balance between protecting public health and safety and ensuring public spaces are clean and accessible to everyone, with protecting the constitutional rights of the homeless to due process and freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. I kindly ask the city attorney to come forward. We also have a panel of individuals in the city family who have been in the forefront of this issue. city attorney that's present, and also I'll ask for sanitation and members of the LAPD to come forward as well. First, give us, if you can, a draft, give us an overview of the draft ordinance that's being presented and explain how it differs from what was given to this committee back in February. Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you. Valerie Flores, Senior Assistant City Attorney. I would like to give an overview by contrasting the current draft ordinance with what's on the books now and also what current practice is now. The current version of 5611 simply makes it a crime to leave personal belongings on the sidewalk. And the city in this ordinance is attempting, as you said, to strike a balance by decriminalizing certain homeless individuals who need to set their belongings down versus, the current ordinance, which just makes every placing of items on the sidewalk a crime. The current practice, recognizing, that we do have a big homeless population, we do try to be sensitive to the issues currently. So now the protocol is to give 72 hours advance notice of cleanups or impoundment of property, and then store the property, bag it, tag it, and store it is the phrase used. But the property is identified. It is then stored by the city, and people are allowed to come reclaim it. Now, we also want to clarify, because I think there have been some misunderstandings, that this ordinance will apply to any property. So if a business owner is encroaching onto a sidewalk with unpermitted goods, wares, tables, chairs, they will be cited. This is not an ordinance that's targeting homeless. Rather, it's really trying to keep the streets, sidewalks free for passage. And
So,
that's
for
the-
example, I'm sorry, Valerie, I have businesses on Watts on Wilmington Avenue that stores product on the sidewalk. We've been out there with building safety numerous times, so this would also
yes,
address.
they cannot be cited under this new ordinance.
Got it.
If they do not bring their property off
Okay.
of the sidewalk. And so, again, this is the main balance we're trying to strike, is to keep the sidewalks clear and passable, and that's one of our mandates as a city.
Even
under
more
the
so-
Americans with Disabilities
Right, the
Act.
ADA, right.
Right. So again, that's the balance that's trying to be struck. A little bit about the exact process. There will be a pre-removal notice placed on any unattended or belongings. If someone is present with their items, they'll be asked to voluntarily move and be given 24 hours to do that. The other important thing about this ordinance is that it's actually self-modulating, because if the city doesn't have sufficient storage space, it won't be able to pick up the items, because this ordinance will mandate that it be stored if it's picked up. So, I think, again, trying to strike a balance, this ordinance does that. So a pre-removal notice will be placed on if the property is not moved, and the sanitation workers go back with no sooner than 24.
Notice will last for 24 hours now.
Yes,
Is that correct?
yes, instead of 72 hours. Which again, if there's a real blockage, that's going to give the city the ability to clear the areas faster. But it also will give sufficient time. It's not necessarily included in the ordinance, but I know the city does plan to do a lot of outreach in connection with the notices, to have information on service providers
Right.
also on the notice, so that people really needing some place to go or store their things will, be able to be in contact with service providers. But if the property hasn't been moved in 24 hours and no one's there when sanitation workers go back to pick it up, it will be then itemized and stored, and it'll be available for pickup. It will no longer be a crime to leave that stuff there. So when someone wants to come pick it up, they will be able to do so. When they go back to the spot where their property was, there will be a post-removal notice after the removal saying, here's where you can go to pick up your stuff. When the person comes, because it's no longer going to be a crime to have left it there to begin with, they'll be able to claim their items without fear of being, cited. And they will not need valid identification to pick up their items. They will simply need to be able to give a sufficient description of the items they left and the place where they were left so that the city has some reassurance that, it's their property.
Now, why not the ID? Obviously, some of them don't even have ID, right?
It's because a lot of people don't have ID.
Right.
So what we're looking for is really just some indicia that the person actually, is the owner, and that could be simply just knowing what was there. And then there are a couple other important aspects of the ordinance that I wanted to discuss, and then if you have any questions, feel free. But very important to the police department was to ban the erection of tents during daylight hours. The police felt like it was, public safety hazard to have an obstructed shelter where the police can't see what's happening inside. And so, but again, trying to strike the balance and know that, at night people may need a shelter. This ordinance says that tents can't be erected in public areas during daylight hours. That would be from 6 to 9 p.m. But during, nighttime hours, they would be able to erect a tent to sleep in if they were homeless. Just so long as they took the tent down by 6 a.m. the following morning. Another problem that has been experienced is that sometimes to create shelters, people are attaching things either to public or private property like posts or poles or benches or sides of buildings, and then they're stringing ropes and putting tarps across the sidewalk or walkways. So that's going to be prohibited as well, to make sure that, again, the sidewalks are completely open. One last, a couple other things. There are going to be a couple exemptions from this 24 hours plus bag tag and store protocol, and that will be for bulky items. The mattresses, the couches that are blocking the sidewalks. Sanitation will be able to come pick those up immediately and discard them. They won't have to store them. Then second, similar, if there are hazardous materials on the sidewalks, flammable materials, feces, sharps, anything that poses a public threat, rodent-infested materials, those can also be immediately picked up and discarded, that we don't need the 24 hours and, again, doesn't need to be stored. So again, that's how the ordinance has tried to strike this very difficult balance between keeping the sidewalks and public spaces clean and accessible, and also, trying to deal sensitively with some of the homeless issues we're experiencing.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Flores. Let me see the presentation first, then I'll ask colleagues for questions. Department of Sanitation, thanks for your hard work as well, and I know we have some of our officers who are present, and it was important for me to give our sanitation folks the proper tools and authority to do what they do. So appreciate it, and I just want to recognize some of your officers who are here. Give us an overview of your current process for cleanups. We've been involved in working as my colleagues with your department, along with the police department, most recently in downtown San Pedro. Just this morning, driving along to avoid traffic on the freeway, drove along Broadway in Mr. Price's district. There was an operation there as well. And to Ms. Flores' point, with striking that balance, what we did in downtown San Pedro, we posted the notice and was at the same time able to bring in my emergency response team to provide the resources and the services for the individuals, and also bring the quality of life patrol car as well to work to provide some compassion behind and being responsive to the residents and the businesses in the area as well. So give us kind of an overview of the process for cleanups, and also what kind of personal property do your folks encounter during these cleanups?
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. My name is Steve Pedersen. I'm representing Bureau of Sanitation. I'm Chief Environmental Compliance Inspector for Watershed Protection Division. Usually what happens with a homeless encampment, that is reported to our office, we will have a representative from Bureau of Street Services go out and assess the conditions there. Afterwards, it enters into our authorization process. And through the authorization process, LASA will go out, make at least 3 visits to the encampment, offering to provide services to the occupants. At that point, they will sign off. Then either myself or the Chief of Street Services will sign off. And then Kevin James from our board will sign off. Once it's gone through the authorization process and is signed off, then the authorization comes back to us. It is scheduled through the council district. The council district would tell us what is their priorities, and then we will set a date. When the day of the 72 hours before the cleanup, we will post. And the posting will basically notify everyone there that a cleanup is scheduled and that they will be obligated to move their items and take their possessions with them. Any items not taken will be removed and put to storage. When we arrive on the day of the scheduled cleanup, we will have LAPD there with us. We usually have LACC or Solids employees. We'll also have my staff. My staff will go in with LAPD. They will ask people to move, give them a chance to move, and then once the area is clear, my guys will go through and do a health hazard determination. They will determine what is a health hazard and needs to be discarded, what should be sent to storage if it's clean, and they will do all the bagging and tagging and recording. Our solids people will go through and remove the trash and debris, and then we will have our contractor come in and sanitize. Once the area has been cleaned and documented, then we'll release it back to the public.
Can I ask one of your officers to come forward? I know we work together. So give us a description, sir, of what have you come across during these cleanups?
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Gonzalo Barriga with Sanitation. Typically, we find a lot of garbage, a lot of contraband shopping carts, containers, bags of trash. We do encounter backpacks, luggage, clothing, either being on the ground, canopy, tents, structures made out of whatever they find on the street. Basically, a lot of discarded items that the public has left out. We usually go through it. More than likely, 70% of it is either a health hazard or garbage and it's destroyed appropriately. A lot of the personal property is then itemized, bagged and tagged, and then our guys escort it back to.
What do you mean by public health? What do you find?
A lot of the stuff we find is human waste, vector issues. We find bed bugs, lice, urination, fecal matter, hypodermic needles, syringes, drug paraphernalia, pipes. For health hazards, also we will encounter like household hazardous waste or materials. You can have propane canisters, which end up somehow, we notice a lot of fires start out and like burn adjacent areas due to campfires and so forth that get left unattended. We also find bleach, just a lot of household hazardous materials that are left out on the street.
And then when you confiscate the items, where are they taken to?
The personal items are taken to the storage unit that's in 5th and Town, in Skid Row and downtown. Postings left at the site where the materials were taken from, describing the location with the address, telephone number, and just the address of how to get a hold of your stuff. And it says you have 90 days to recover your belongings.
See, I didn't mean to dismiss you, Steve or Valerie. I mean, appreciate that. Thanks for your service.
Actually, I did want to make one other quick point.
Yes.
The version you have has a couple of cleanups, and we've also made a couple changes. One was to add bikeways, because we've
That's right.
also had some issues where there have been some encampments on bikeways which are dangerous. And also, we've included the word
Fence,
fence in
right.
terms of things that attachments can't be attached to.
Yeah, I read that. Thanks, Valerie. For the Los Angeles Police Department, describe the types of incidents you're asked to respond to that relate to the homeless. And secondly, do the homeless ever become violent during the encounters, during the cleanups?
Yes, good afternoon, Council Member. If I could, I'd like to also have Captain Orb and Lieutenant Brockway
Please.
up here from Central Area.
Please.
And my name is Bob Arcos. I'm the Assistant Commanding
Thanks,
Officer
Commander.
of Operations Central Bureau and the newly assigned Department Homeless Coordinator. So I definitely want to
The
represent...
newly assigned Department Homeless Coordinator.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes, comes
Hey,
with
Cap,
the
good to see you,
title.
sir.
So I definitely want to represent the issues that Central Area and the department are facing, and Captain Orb and Captain Brockway have been assigned into Central Area for 3 years and have encountered many more things than what I've been exposed to in the short time I've been there.
Okay, I'll defer to you.
Yes,
All
sir.
right,
What we expect to find many times on these tents, encampments, a large quantity of weapons. We find drugs, drug paraphernalia. We notice that while these tents are up or the structures are in place, it creates an environment where people will do their narcotics. As recently as last week, our officers recovered over 400 balloons of heroin and a gun out of one of the enclosures. So it creates an environment for drug sales, drug use. It imports some of our gang members and narcotics dealers from throughout the city to come to this location to sell and prey upon the unfortunate people that are on the sidewalks. So we see that on a daily basis. We would expect also to find people that are mentally ill that take refuge on the streets, and it's harder to see them many times. They'll be under tarps or they'll have materials on top of them, and it's hard for us to even discern when people are actually there. So, but types of radio calls, anything from assault with deadly weapons to 415 disturbances or people that are mentally ill. So we have a variety of issues in these areas.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Lieutenant Billy Brockway. I was working in the Safer Cities Initiative Task Force for the last 13, 14 months. To piggyback Commander Arcos and Captain Orb, we have seen a large increase in the homeless population in Skid Row, and Skid Row is defined as 3rd to 7th Main to Alameda, 50 square blocks. What we've seen, though, more than anything, is the predators coming in to prey upon the homeless individuals who are sleeping on the sidewalk, staying on the sidewalk. And what I mean by that is these individuals, these predators are coming in, setting up tents, coming under the eyes of possibly needing assistance, and setting up shop to sell narcotics, to prey upon our homeless individuals and the mentally ill. So in an attempt to ratify that issue, I think the best thing for us to be able to do is to move forward to not let tents be up there in the middle of the day, and to be able to address those issues as we see fit, and to also coordinate those efforts of Department of Mental Health, LASA, and DMH, or DHS.
Well, let me take the time to put on my senior lead officer hat, and doing so, had the opportunity to serve for 7 years as a SLO, and it was important to seek the necessary services for the individuals who are homeless and living in the streets, but also be responsive to our community and businesses that I patrol in my basic car area. And for me personally, it wasn't about hooking and booking, right? And unfortunately, oftentimes I developed a relationship during the booking process. To this day, I've seen folks now turn their lives around. Just Jamila Salam, who just Facebooked me the other day and said, thanks for your assistance. Her and many others that I've come across. The ordinance that's before us today does not necessarily direct police officers to cite the hell out of these people, right? You're looking at the spirit of the law and the letter of the law here. Share with us the the thoughts or the concerns about criminalizing the homeless and the officers that are out in the streets, not only with LAPD, also the sanitation folks who are building relationships with these folks, ensure that they get the necessary services that they deserve. Is it about citing after cite and arresting our way out of the problem, as we often say?
Well, I could say from our standpoint that this is not about arresting. We would like everybody in the Skid Row area to be able to support themselves, to be able to get housing, to be able to get the care that they need. But there are instances when that fails. And then you start seeing a small area start taking over the entire block by just one person. And with repeat warnings, requests for them to remove some of the items there, it goes upon deaf ears. So it gives us the opportunity to at least have some enforcement tools when necessary. Our goal, like I said, we have service providers out there on a daily basis. We're doing our best for the outreach to go out and see if we can get folks the help that they need. We also have full-time footbeat officers in the area that their primary goal is to have outreach with the community, and if somebody needs the assistance, they're there to request it, and we'll do our best to facilitate that.
I think, Councilman, I think you said it best, though, too. It's not all about the hooking and booking. There's a number of compassionate stories about our police officers' interactions with the homeless in Skid Row. I think you've seen some of the footage recently of the senior lead officers in there and being recognized by the city council. Everyone does want to make a difference in that community. At the same time, we also know about the criminal element that is embedded in there as well, and that really is what we want to have the focus on.
Right. Appreciate that. Well, it's a very tough issue. It truly is, and I'm very sensitive to the need to protect the constitutional rights of the homeless, but I also believe public spaces are public, and we should not allow any personal property to be stored in areas that should be clean, open, and accessible to everyone. Even more so with the recent agreement with the litigation with the ADA community. We promised we are off on the hook to for the next 30 years to make our sidewalks accessible to everyone. So I don't believe we should allow an exception for attending property, but rather provide the homeless with secure locations to store property. So those are my thoughts. I'll turn it over to my colleagues that have questions, comments. Mr. Price?
Yeah, thank you. It's we all are concerned about the removal of attended and unattended property, and it's really a big issue. You referenced the situation on Broadway, just minutes from my residence, and it's really a difficult problem to see. And one hand, neighbors expect to have a clean pathway, a safe pathway. On the other hand, we do want to be sensitive to these individuals who are in real need of help, a variety of help. And I'm just concerned that in our zeal, in our efforts to get these individuals off the streets, to get them clean, that we're turning them into criminals. Clarify again the discussion about an infraction, a misdemeanor. What's the level of punishment that's potential for individuals whose stuff is still on the sidewalk and doesn't get removed? I mean, it's good to say we got 24 hours, but we come back, and then what happens if it's there? The guy's a criminal. He's, what's the result? What kind of discretion are we talking about giving officers in this situation?
I just want to start at our current ordinance, which makes it a crime, potentially a misdemeanor, to leave your belongings on the sidewalk. So this ordinance makes a distinction between attended property and unattended property. So if after 24 hours notice is posted, a worker from sanitation comes back, maybe with LAPD present, and a person is there, has not moved the property is attended, and again, they're said, you need to move, and they don't, then they'll be cited. They'll be, left there, but they can be cited. And then there are progressive penalties under the code that, to address if this becomes a frequent pattern or it's every day, they continue not to move. But again, I think the focus first is on trying to get compliance just voluntarily. If that doesn't work, then they can be cited if they're present and they don't move. Or they could simply say, I don't have anywhere to move it, and the city could take it, and then they wouldn't be cited. But if there's a notice posted and the belongings are still there 24 hours later, the city will take them. There will be no criminal penalty associated with having left the property there to begin with. And when someone comes to pick it up, they can't be cited by claiming it. So it tries to make a distinction between people who really don't have any place to move it, at which point they could surrender it to storage, or just leave it unattended and not move it, in which case it will go to storage. But the people who are, present and refusing to move after being voluntarily requested to do so can be cited under this ordinance.
Cited for misdemeanor, right? For
It
infraction,
can be,
or what?
yeah, it could.
It can elevate
yes,
to a misdemeanor.
Yes, exactly. Again, with compliance, infraction, usually they start as an infraction, but they need to have some teeth. Otherwise, people, will just ignore them. But again, this ordinance does try to make a distinction and give a path for people to allow their items to be stored or moved versus just citing them just because they set them down.
Mm-hmm. Well, it does appear to be a more, flexible kind of approach and policy. But we're still talking about only one storage facility, correct?
Right, but again, if the storage facility gets full, then the city won't be able to pick up the stuff. So on the one hand, having this ordinance motivates the city to get more storage, because unless there's a place for it, we can't even pick it up, because this ordinance promises we'll store it.
And I'm going to have a motion to look into that, adding more storage facilities in the city, Mr. Price.
Right.
Well, my area's got about 160 encampments, so I certainly am very sensitive and familiar with the problem. Many of these encampments are butting against private properties, homes, and alleys when we're cleaning out the alleys. So the public safety concerns are real and legitimate. And I'm going to, as a courtesy, I'm going to be supportive of moving this ordinance out to the floor. I still have some real concerns though about our enforcement and even with restraint, the ability to to criminalize folks when they don't have any. Well, they have less choices than we like to see. But we have to create some balance because neighbors are also concerned and certainly are entitled to have a clean and safe environment. So I'll support it, Mr. Chairman. But I still have some concerns. I still have some hopes that we can find a better way to not only provide storage but provide resources.
Yep.
From housing on
mental health
on up,
resources.
mental health supportive services that
Right.
really I think are going to be the answer to solving this problem. Not how long we let somebody stay on the street or where we move them to.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Price. And to piggyback what you said, we ought to have more storage options throughout the city and a more regional approach if we want to make this work. And I'll make some instructions after. Mr. Cedillo?
Yeah. Well, obviously, this remains as problematic for me as it does for my colleagues, and this dilemma that we have. You said if there's not storage, then they don't take it?
Well, they can't because this ordinance mandates that they store it if they pick it up.
So then what happens to the person who then is there with it?
Again, they wouldn't be cited because if it can't be picked up, then they're not, they wouldn't even come out. And once the storage is full, there will be no ability to pick up more storage. I mean, I think now what the city does sometimes is they just go in and clean and then just put the stuff right back. So that might happen, but no one's cited during those sorts of cleanups. They're just asked to move the stuff, or then the city moves it and then cleans and then sets it right back down. That whatever's not confiscated, like the hazardous materials and the bulky items.
Right. So the minute that storage is full, this law becomes null and void.
Practical effect, yes. But again, the storage is for 90 days. If no one comes and picks it up in 90 days, the city may discard it.
No,
So there will be turnover at the storage facilities. So as space opens up, then the city can have more storage. And of course, best of all, if the city got more storage options, that would enable the city to, store more items. So that would be the ideal.
What's our capacity?
$1,600 bins, I think, currently.
There's two types of storage. There's storage.
Come up to the front, please.
Hi, there's two types of storage,
For the
same
record,
location.
Your name for the-
Gonzalo Barriga Sanitation. There's two types of storage at the same location. One is the city comes in and is storing items that were collected out on the sidewalk or in public right-of-way. And then the other scenario is the storage center is there for people to use as an actual storage locker where they can come and check in and look at their items whenever they need during normal working hours. I'm not aware of a time yet, though, that we've exceeded the city returning, picking up public stuff that was collected in the right-of-way. I don't think we've hit that limit where we've reached capacity on our end. I know on the other end where people have lockers, it's running short.
Okay, so we're near capacity on the personal storage, which is optional, free, voluntary for everyone.
Correct.
And then on the other storage, we don't know what capacity is or under what conditions we'd reach capacity.
During the way we operate right now, I don't think we've had an issue as of now.
Right.
Because
every 90 days, we are discarding items.
Right. What's the distinctions between, what would be the impact on storage between these two provisions that exist? What we're doing new and what we did before? In other words, so now we're going to adopt, or assuming we adopted these new provisions, what's the anticipated growth of materials that would be stored?
We haven't done a calculation. This new 5611 would be just another added tool that we can use when needed, but we have not done any calculations to see what additional items we will be bringing in addition to all the cleanings that we're doing.
I don't want to belabor this. It's a long day. The sun's striking you. We have a new committee, a homeless committee.
Yeah, right there.
Ad hoc committee, and my recommendation is that this goes there. I'm not prepared to support this yet. I have several concerns. We haven't measured what's going to be the impact, and so we don't know. So for me, it just doesn't make sense if we say we don't know what the measure is, right? What will be the impact for us then to proceed? If we hit capacity, then it moots out the law. And so we should know that. Those are things that we should know before we put this in. I think there's measures for it, and I think there's metrics for us to figure that out. And I think we should do that at the front end, not at the back end. It just seems to make sense to me. I think we have a committee that's designed specifically to address these matters, and this committee should hear those matters and figure that out. I will say to you, there's I'm not sure about maybe you can tell me, what's the demographics of the homeless population? What percentage is African American? What percentage is Latino? What percentage is Latino immigrant? What percentage is immigrant of the homeless population in the city of Los Angeles?
I think I believe LASA and all the other advocates had put some numbers together. They would be better fit to address that.
On the number of contacts.
Yeah.
And how does this impact and relate to street vending? How would these interface? Is there particular zones here that this law is going to, I mean, this is a citywide law. Are you looking for specific zones in which you're going to implement this?
No, this ordinance would be citywide. And so with regard to vending, my understanding of the current proposal would be a permitting process. So any item that's permitted to be on a sidewalk will, of course, be allowed and couldn't be cited under the new 5611. So the two ordinances shouldn't impact each other at all. This would just be for unpermitted, either vendors that are encroaching on the sidewalk that have brick and mortars, like in some of the districts where they put wares out on the sidewalk, or, if someone left something there, a homeless person or any other person. But I did just want to talk briefly about the capacity.
So what applies then on this one? If they're unpermitted vendors, right, then this is the law that applies to them? They get 24-hour notice to not...
Well, to move, basically. If they were,
And then what's the distance of moving? How far do they have to move?
They would have to move off the public property within 24 hours.
Right. How far?
There's no distance. It would just be, the private versus not private property. Anything controlled by the city under the city's jurisdiction, they would have to move off of.
Right, but if they... So how do you envision we enforce that? I mean, you're going to follow someone if they move down the street, down the block, they move around the corner? Are we following them to see if they continue to have a continuing wrong involved here? Or?
I think we would leave it to the police to best utilize their resources to ensure, I guess they're trying to ensure compliance and also just make sure they prioritize their resources. But before we get to that, I did also just want to address briefly the capacity issue, because we have current storage capacity, but this ordinance isn't going to change the number of sanitation workers or police officers out, dealing with the property on sidewalks. So we don't, unless we get increased funding to help keep, the sidewalks or clear the sidewalks, I don't know how this ordinance in and of itself would generate any additional capacity. Instead, it would just allow the city, when it had capacity, to get the stuff off the sidewalk faster.
Right, that's the question, right? I mean, we don't know whether or not this new law will increase capacity and that will max out. So that's what I'm asking. What's the distinctions between the two laws? We don't know.
Yeah.
So we're going to change it. And I assume, since this is designed to address this problem of encroachments on public space, that we anticipate a degree of success, which means we're going to probably remove more than we did in the past. And if we're removing more than we did in the past, then what's the measure of that? How does that stand next to our capacity?
Right. Well, we will have the ability to move it faster, but we will still have the same number of people doing the moving.
I got that, but it's the same people, but now they're unencumbered. So it's the same amount of people, but who are now unencumbered by the previous. I mean, this is expanding the capacity and the reach of the city workforce. Is that correct?
No, the current protocol is to just give 72-hour notice, so the same number of people are still removing items off of public walkways and thoroughfares, but
in
this
a shorter
ordinance,
time period.
yes, there would be a shorter time period.
So that means 1/3 of the time it will be removed quicker. And so in other words, instead of being out for 3 days, it's going to be out for 1 day. That means it's a 3 times, like a 300% increase of accumulation. If we do that, we accumulate 300% more. We have to measure then how does that measure up on the side of the capacity, of our capacity.
Right, again, and if we had 3 times more sanitation workers, you'd be absolutely right. We could pick up 3 times more stuff. We would need 3 times more storage capacity. But without, the ordinance itself won't generate that additional increase because it doesn't call for any additional.
Yes, it calls for the elimination of the waiting period. So in the past, because I don't think you're telling me that people are recovering or taking property 100% of the time. They're evaluating property. They say, well, we'll tag this for 72 days and we have to come back in 72 hours. In this instance, it's 24 hours.
Right.
So that increase needs to be measured to our storage capacity. And so we don't know that, so we should figure that out before we, from my point of view, I would need to know that before we could support this. The second part is question of immigration status. It's my cross to bear. And when an immigrant gets a misdemeanor, they're barred from citizenship for life. That's a very big concern for me. And so immigration status may be a cause of someone being homeless, right? They come to this country, things are new, they can't get a place to stay, they're in transition, and in some instances, they're homeless. Domestic violence is another reason why people are homeless, and domestic violence is also a reason why immigrant women may be homeless. And so given those factors, I'm obviously not inclined to have anybody get a misdemeanor. And this also overlaps with the question of street vendors, because the penalty is too extreme with respect to the circumstance that someone confronts.
Thank you. Just, Mr. Studio, know that we reached out to the chair of the ad hoc committee. It was decided that we just have this item here in Public Works and send to council. And of course, the discretion of the council president, he can decide whether or not to dual refer. And it was the will of the council president to have this item heard here. But doesn't mean we can continue that dialogue and reach out to the ad hoc committee.
Seems that's the sole purpose of us
having that ad hoc
creating the ad hoc committee. It's an ad hoc committee.
I suggested,
circumstances.
Right. I suggested
so we can get a fuller research, fuller study, fuller sensitivity, fuller focus.
Right. I suggested the dual committee, having a joint committee hearing
or
on
a joint,
this.
with your leadership.
Can I ask Officer Rubright, who's here, to come, and maybe he can help us understand, Mr. Cedillo, some of your points. We can make decisions here at City Hall. It's great. We heard from Gonzalo and who's on the ground on a daily basis addressing this issue. Officer Rubright is one of my officers in the at LAPD Harbor, who's part of the quality of life car. Walk us through our last cleanup. Walk us through the number one, the posting, the outreach, and did the individuals, the homeless individuals, did they all comply? Did we store any of their properties? And what's happening today with the follow-up?
Yes, Officer Rubright, Los Angeles Police Department, Harbor Division, Quality Life Car. Several weeks ago, I participated with the Department of Sanitation with the cleanup in downtown San Pedro, and the preparations for the cleanup started several weeks prior to it even commencing. My partner and I try to balance between outreach and enforcement on issues that deal with quality of life. And so we liaison with LASA and the ERT staff and the local nonprofits. And so several weeks prior to even this going down, we go out there, we make contact, we introduce ourselves. We hand out informational pamphlets on the services that are available in addition to whatever LASA and the local nonprofits are already providing. And we explain to them that, hey, citizens are complaining about the encampment, and a cleanup will be taking place shortly. And then after that, the 72-hour notices are posted and giving them 3 days to remove their belongings. And so on the day of the cleanup, we coordinate with all the other department entities and just assist with the security and make sure that everything's removed appropriately. But just to give you an idea of what we do, we operate on a whole 180 degree of differences. For example, yesterday I arrested an individual that was homeless after I recovered 2 pounds of marijuana from inside his temporary structure. And on
Part of
Friday,
the city was that?
that was in Harbor City, sir. And then on Friday, I've arranged to take 2 individuals to a local nonprofit where I'm going to assist them in filling out job applications. I've talked to some staff members from the USS Iowa who have agreed to employ these individuals on their maintenance staff if they can get the applications in.
And then in the cleanup in front of Untitled, if I recall, there were 7 encampments. How many do we store any of the belongings?
Yes.
We did. And how many do we provide shelter for out of the 7 individuals?
How many people do we provide services to?
Or shelter? Do you remember from LASA?
Housing.
Housing, right.
Yeah, there was 3 or 4 groups of people there that we offered, but they declined.
Okay. Thanks for your work, and thanks for your collaboration with our community-based organizations. And again, I think one of the concerns I heard from you and Officer Lopez, your partner, was the storage. I mean, it would take you out of the field to store the property to come downtown LA, because since that's the only one. And that's just an issue for all of us, whether on the west side, out in the valley, down at the harbor, South LA. So isn't that...
Speaking with the homeless individuals that I've come in contact, they're down in San Pedro in the harbor area. Their number one concern is storage.
Okay.
And that's what they want.
Okay. Thanks, Elliot. Thank you. So I know Mr. Cedillo had a concern about moving this to council.
Look,
Yeah.
as we would say, I don't think it's cooked yet. Right? So, for example, we don't have infrastructure throughout the city. So we have infrastructure in downtown Los Angeles, but we have encampments throughout the city. Right? 110 in my district, right along the corridor. 14 has them right here by the freeway. And we had them down the street at the park. So encampments proliferate throughout the city. I trust, Senator, that you have the same thing. And we know we only have one location, so there's not an infrastructure in place. So to take these men out of the field undermines their ability to do their work, right? If they got to come downtown to do that. So we're implementing a law before we have an ability to enforce it. And so that's problematic. It's not the way that we should do this. It's also problematic that we don't have enough metrics to figure out what's the infrastructure that we need, right? As we, on the other hand, continue to try to build housing, low-income, housing for the chronically homeless, the full wraparound, et cetera, et cetera. As we proceed along that, we're moving forward with these laws that aren't quite ready yet. We don't have the infrastructure. And so it seems to me that we should at least look at what the need is. We need an assessment. I mean, more that goes beyond what we see visually, the anecdotal part, but a real measure. Now, we know that we just did a homeless count, but we should also have there should be some mapping involved here to see what your district needs, what my district needs, what the various districts need, so that we put the infrastructure in place first. Because if not, it doesn't make sense. The way it's been discussed here today, it won't function. And so then we're putting forth the law that doesn't function and doesn't have the support. I know that there's a great use of discretion that's involved in how you handle this in the field. I'm not concerned about that. I will say that to you. I'm not concerned about your discretion. I'm concerned about us writing the right laws that give you the right tools that you need, for us to be more precise about that. I wrote legislation some people didn't like, but it was enhancements for people selling drugs to the homeless in certain areas. What's the status of that? How's that work? That was a tool that people clamored to me and said, look, do this. Now, that was kind of contrary to my essence, but I took faith and belief in that you told me, I need this tool. We need these enhancements for people who sell drugs because they prey upon people, right? So, well, then, where are we with that? What was the effect of that? What was the utility of that? If you say, well, the tents during the daytime allow people to set this up, but where's the evaluation of that? And so I'm frustrated because every time I go on that 110, I see the same thing. And I know my residents are going to my district office and clamoring that we've got to do something. But I don't want the fact that they're clamoring for us to do something that's not right. and it's not as effective and not as efficient as it should be. And clearly, if we don't have the infrastructure, that really undermines our capacity. If we don't have the numbers and the census count on the immigrant population, it gives me great trepidation to move forward. And so, for those reasons, I think we need a more focused evaluation of this specific policy, right? And what the costs are and what the metrics are, so that we don't move urgently into it, but yet, we're kind of building the plane while we're flying. I get that. But some parts of it, we're a little ahead of ourselves. Because if we get to capacity and storage and we don't have it, or what's going to happen down in your area? I'm not far from downtown, but down in San Pedro, it's not a valid choice for them to have to decide, well, do I do storage here? Do I go to LA or do I leave it? Right? So we're putting laws that can't be enforced, that we can't comply with, that we can't implement. It's unfair. It's really unfair to the people who are going to be challenged to make those choices. And so my sense is it's just not ready yet. And so I'm not prepared to move it.
Got it. If I can bring Ms. Flores back up, I know we've been talking about 5611 for quite some time, and oftentimes have handcuffed those who are out in the field trying to be responsive to businesses and residents and those who want accessible sidewalks. So explain to me the sense of urgency on moving forward on this item.
A couple things to emphasize. One, the current version of 5611 makes it a misdemeanor to just set your stuff down. So this is a vast improvement and will actually help people who are homeless in the sense that they'll, have a different option. And if they really don't have any place to put their items, they'll no longer be subject to a citation. They'll have, the option of leaving it there and having it stored. Number two, I think that for certain encampments, I think it would aid the sanitation department, our bureau, and the police to have the ability to pick up things within 24 hours, as opposed to waiting the 72 hours. There's certain, critical intersections and passageways in the city, and I think if the city had the tool to come in more quickly. And again, right now we have enough capacity. If we didn't, I think if we reached it, that there would be a standstill, and that might drive the impetus for more storage and infrastructure.
And how long has this been brewing, the whole 5611 redrafting of the ordinance?
Well, it is tied somewhat to the Levon lawsuit. In that lawsuit, the city was enjoined from simply picking up personal items. And
Currently, we have an injunction on this ordinance.
Right.
Therefore,
That
we
lawsuit's
can't
being
do
wrapped up.
right.
But we do believe we need a replacement for the current version of 5611, which again just criminalizes putting something down or blocking the sidewalk with no other alternatives that are provided in this ordinance. So that remains on the books unless and until the city.
A replacement's in place, and that's the one that's before us.
And again, we think this ordinance is far more respectful of the Fourth Amendment rights of people who have personal possessions. It'll ensure the city can't criminalize them setting down their belongings or swoop them up and just discard them. So again, we think this is a preferable ordinance to what we currently have on the books, and so that's the urgency to replace an ordinance that is very stark, creates no balance between homeless rights and the needs of law enforcement and sanitation, and also the ability just to act more quickly when the need arises.
And Mr. Cedillo, with all due respect, this is the reason why I think, and I support this moving forward.
And I have tremendous respect for you, but I didn't quite hear. So we're currently enjoined from our previous, right?
We are enjoined from discarding personal items that we pick up, and we have to give 72 hours notice when we pick up items, and we have to bag, tag, and store them. That's what the injunction does. It doesn't speak to 5611 about whether or not we can make it a crime to set things down in the first place. But this ordinance would, again, strike a better balance than what we currently have on the books.
So previously, there's no crime. There's no crime that's simply a restriction on how we would take someone else's property.
Well, again, currently we can cite, someone and prosecute as a misdemeanor anyone who leaves something on a public right-of-way.
That's what I'm asking.
We are enjoined from picking up that stuff and discarding it. That's what the injunction covers. It doesn't enjoin us from criminalizing the putting it down, but it does require that if we want to move it, we have to store it for 90 days if it's a personal item.
And so have we been enforcing the provisions for which we're not enjoined?
I don't believe so. I believe that, we would like to get a more balanced ordinance on the books before we would, start citing people.
And is this before court right now? Does somebody have jurisdiction over this, or we?
Should we,
If you want a detailed discussion, we should be.
if we can, let's break the closed session on the Levon case, so we can have some questions.
So the committee will now recess to closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 45956.9D1 in order to confer with legal counsel in relation to the case entitled Tony Levan et al. Versus the City of Los Angeles, United States District Court Case Number CV 1102874 PSG AGWX 9th Circuit Course Cadence Number 1156253. The pending litigation concerns a preliminary injunction barring the removal and disposal of property from sidewalks of Skid Row.
Welcome back to open session. Okay. So the item before us, and I would recommend approval of the city attorney's report and send that report and the ordinance, but instruct the CAO with the assistance of GSD and LASA to report with recommendations on a regional strategy for the storage of the personal property of homeless persons in the city of Los Angeles. To have one storage facility centered in downtown LA is doing a disservice to the men and women who are being responsive to the community, and also the homeless individuals as well. So that would be my recommendation. Appreciate that. And do you want to take a stand on this?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That makes this better, but we really have a lot of work to do. And so, I'm going to lay off the provision at this time,
okay,
because I think we've got a lot more work to do. But I appreciate that we need to focus on putting this infrastructure in place. I mean, it's basic. It's the challenge we have with water in the state. We don't have infrastructure. It's the challenge we have with healthcare delivery. We don't have infrastructure. It's
housing. I mean, housing first.
Yeah.
Philosophy as well. Getting these men and women into homes and shelter.
Right. But putting infrastructure in place first before we execute a law, because it undermines the ability of the men and women who have to enforce it, and we put them in choices between two bad choices. And,
how much capacity do we have now? Did we get a read on that?
1,600. Can you come to the mic, please?
Yeah, the facility is half full. It's quarter full. What's the?
Gonzalo Barriga Sanitation. I believe it's a 16 to 20,000 square foot facility. About a third of it is used for stuff that's collected out on the public right of way, and I think 2/3 of it is lockers for the public people that need it.
As saying it's at capacity.
As we stand right now, when I take stuff to storage that's collected in the public right of way, we have not had any issues.
With capacity.
With capacity, and I believe in the last 6 to 12 months, maybe 3 or 4 people have actually collected anything from that locker.
And every 90 days, you remove what's left there.
It's emptied out by the contractor, Chrysalis, who manages the facility.
Right.
Right. No, because it's not,
Thank you, Gonzalo.
Senator, I think the challenge that we have is if you're trying to do this work in the San Fernando Valley, you're not going to trek to Los Angeles or San Pedro. You're not trekking to downtown LA. I mean, if you're on the west side, Venice, this is going to be a challenge for people in Venice. How are they going to, right? So, I mean, we know where these pockets are, and so it's just, we're not quite there yet.
Okay, so with that, unanimous, you go with that? You want to? Okay, so we'll, yes. Steve, you want to, some closing thoughts?
Yes, I just wanted to add, Officer Barrega just reminded me that in the interim, until we have additional facilities, our department has offered to deliver personal items when someone calls in that they need to retrieve it, to bring it back to that area, to a city facility in that area, and we'll set up a meeting to give them back the items.
Very good.
Have you done that yet? I mean, is that?
We've done that before, yes.
Okay, got it. Okay. Okay, so we'll approve this item with one dissenting vote, and that's Mr. Cedillo, and send item 2 to council
And that will be...
as instructed and as amended.
And, Mr. Chair, would you like to adopt the amended draft ordinance dated May 20th and not present an order filed the ordinance dated May 6th?
That'll be the order, yes, because it was a revised one, right? Adding fencing and bike paths, right? Yes, that'll be the order. Okay, public comment we already fulfilled. Thank you so much. This Public Works Committee meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
We're getting better.
Yep, we're getting there.